I work when I work, and I'm a total worker,
Right.
totally concentrated on that project. But then when the project's finished, I am so happy to be not working.
You start thinking about, if you start worrying about all kinds of images and stuff, you get false impressions of yourself. And to me, I always believe in moving forward with whatever I'm doing. And
For decades, Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand seemed to live in separate Hollywood universes. One, the rugged cowboy who built his legend in the dust and grit of westerns. The other, a powerhouse voice and actress who turned vulnerability into art. But in 1989, whispers began to swirl that their worlds collided in a way no one expected. Did two of Hollywood's most powerful icons share a secret affair that never made it to the headlines? Or was it just another rumor born in the shadows of fame? Reports claim they were more than just acquaintances, yet neither ever spoke about it. And that silence has only fueled the mystery. Stay with us, because by the end of this story, you'll see why this alleged connection between Streisand and Eastwood refuses to die, and why even now fans can't stop asking what really happened behind closed doors. Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand were never supposed to cross paths in any meaningful way. On the surface, their Hollywood empires were built on completely different foundations. Eastwood, born in San Francisco in 1930, carved his image from the dust and smoke of Western landscapes. He was the lone gunslinger, the tight-lipped anti-hero who made silence and a stare more dangerous than any gunshot. From Rawhide to Dirty Harry and Unforgiven, Eastwood was not just an actor. He was a myth, a man who stood for rugged independence and a rejection of Hollywood's polish. Streisand, on the other hand, was the definition of refinement, vulnerability, and artistry. Born in Brooklyn in 1942, she grew up fighting against the industry's obsession with glamour. She didn't look like the typical starlet, but when she sang, the world stopped. With a voice that could break hearts and command arenas, she conquered both music and film, winning awards, smashing records, and rewriting what it meant to be a leading lady. Her roles in Funny Girl, A Star Is Born, and her breathtaking music career made her not just a star, but a cultural force. By the 1970s and 1980s, both Eastwood and Streisand had reached near mythical status, yet their images couldn't have been more different. Eastwood embodied masculine power and stoicism. Streisand embodied vulnerability, control, and precision. He was the cowboy who said little. She was the songbird who said everything. He preferred minimalism. She was known for exacting detail and perfectionism. But it's exactly those contrasts that made the idea of them together so explosive. To Hollywood watchers, the thought of these two giants colliding was almost unthinkable, yet at the same time irresistible. What also made their worlds intersect was timing. By the late 1980s, Streisand had weathered turbulent relationships, including her marriage to Elliot Gould and her high-profile romance with John Peters. Eastwood, meanwhile, had long been dogged by whispers of infidelity and complicated entanglements. He was known for being magnetic off-screen as well as on, leaving behind a trail of confirmed romances, alleged affairs, and children who emerged over the years from relationships outside of his marriages. Hollywood insiders understood one thing: wherever Eastwood went, rumors followed. And when Streisand's name suddenly became tied to his, the whispers had the perfect storm to spread. But here's the catch. Throughout their careers, both Streisand and Eastwood were fiercely protective of their images. Streisand famously controlled her narrative with an iron grip, carefully curating what the public saw and didn't see. Eastwood, though more stoic, mastered the art of silence, letting rumors float around him without ever giving them the oxygen of a response. That's why when reports surfaced in 1989 that the two had shared more than just polite Hollywood interaction, fans were left stunned. Could the man of stone and the woman of song really have shared a hidden chapter in their lives? What makes the rumor so fascinating isn't just the pairing itself, but the fact that both of them refused to ever address it. No denial, no confirmation, just silence. And in Hollywood, silence speaks louder than any headline. It's that silence that kept the whispers alive for decades, fueling endless speculation. Was it a fleeting encounter, a deeper connection, or nothing at all? The truth may never be fully known, but the fact that their names remain linked tells us something important about the allure of scandal when it comes to two icons who seemed untouchable in their separate worlds. And while this alleged scandal still sits in the shadows of Hollywood history, the origins of the rumor trace back to one very specific moment in time, a year when both Eastwood and Streisand were at crossroads in their lives, and when a simple interaction between them set off a chain reaction of gossip. That year was 1989, and it's where this story takes its most intriguing turn. By 1989, both Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand were at fascinating crossroads in their personal and professional lives. Eastwood was coming off decades of success, as both an actor and director, entering a stage of his career where he was increasingly respected, not just for his tough guy roles, but for his vision behind the camera. Streisand, meanwhile, had already secured her spot as one of the most celebrated entertainers in history, balancing blockbuster films, chart-topping albums, and a reputation as one of the most perfectionist and powerful figures in Hollywood. Whispers emerged in gossip columns and entertainment chatter that Eastwood and Streisand had more than a passing interaction. Some reports placed them in the same social circles that year, while others suggested there was a brief but intense encounter that went beyond friendship. The story was never covered by the mainstream press with hard evidence, but it didn't need to be. The idea of two icons from such different worlds suddenly connected was enough to spark fascination. Barbra, known for her sensitivity and artistry, and Clint, known for his stoicism and raw magnetism, together, it sounded more like a Hollywood script than reality. What gave the rumor weight was timing. Eastwood had long been known for entanglements that often blurred the lines between public and private. By this point, his reputation for affairs and complicated relationships was no secret, with past partners and children surfacing over the years. Streisand, though far more careful with her public image, was no stranger to speculation either. She had been linked romantically to high-profile figures like Elliott Gould, John Peters, and even rumored connections with actors and politicians. The thought of her adding Eastwood to that list fit neatly into the Hollywood narrative machine. The alleged 1989 moment is often described in fan circles as less about a full-fledged relationship and more about a spark, a brief encounter that may or may not have turned romantic. A single evening at a party, an introduction at a Hollywood event, or perhaps something more private. The details were always vague, shifting depending on the source. That vagueness is exactly what fueled the allure. The less people knew, the more they imagined, and in the celebrity ecosystem of the late 1980s, imagination was everything. Tabloids of the era thrived on these kinds of stories, and even without concrete evidence, the Streisand-Eastwood rumor had all the right ingredients: two megastars, both at the height of influence, both with reputations that drew attention, and both silent on the matter. Their silence gave gossip columns free rein to speculate, and for fans, that speculation was almost as entertaining as a confirmed scandal. Whether or not there was ever more than a fleeting interaction, what's certain is that 1989 became the anchor point for the whispers. It was the year their names were first spoken together in a way that suggested secrecy. And while no photographs, interviews, or confirmations ever surfaced to back it up, the rumor persisted, growing louder as the years went on. Because in Hollywood, sometimes the most enduring stories aren't the ones backed by evidence, but the ones left to the imagination. But how much credibility can a rumor really have when no proof exists? To answer that, you have to look at the patterns, at Eastwood's long history of relationships that blurred the lines between rumor and reality, and at Streisand's own string of romances that kept her name in the headlines. Together, those patterns don't prove anything, but they certainly add fuel to the fire. When it comes to the alleged connection between Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand, the most telling detail isn't what people said, it's what neither of them ever said. Unlike so many other Hollywood scandals that are either confirmed, denied, or spun through carefully worded press releases, this one has always existed in a vacuum of silence. Streisand and Eastwood never gave an interview, never made a public joke, and never even hinted at the rumor. For some, that's proof enough that it was false. For others, it's exactly why the story has lived on, because the absence of denial is sometimes more suspicious than denial itself. On the evidence side, the story mostly lives in lists, dating archives, and gossip columns from the late 1980s and early 1990s. Pop culture databases like Who's Dated Who list Streisand and Eastwood, as having encountered one another in 1989, though no serious news outlet ever documented it. That word encounter is vague by design. It could mean a single meeting, a dinner, a conversation, or something more intimate. The ambiguity leaves plenty of space for readers to project their own ideas of what really happened. And in the celebrity rumor ecosystem, ambiguity is the strongest fuel of all. Still, when fans go searching for photographs, timelines, or concrete accounts, nothing emerges. No paparazzi caught them arm in arm. No friends came forward decades later to confirm the whispers. The only real source has always been the rumor mill itself. That lack of substance makes the story fragile, but it also makes it tantalizing, because unlike a story with hard evidence, this one remains unsolved, a question mark hanging over two of the biggest names in entertainment. For Eastwood, silence was part of his brand. Throughout his life, he never wasted energy batting down gossip. He let stories circulate, sometimes even letting them enhance his mysterious reputation. His long list of confirmed affairs and children born outside his marriages only added to the perception that almost any rumor about him could have a kernel of truth. For Streisand, the silence worked differently. She was a master of narrative control, famously obsessed with the details of how she was seen. The fact that she never felt the need to shut this story down raised eyebrows. Why let such a rumor exist if it wasn't true? Was it beneath her to acknowledge? Or was she letting people believe what they wanted because denying it might only add more oxygen? The doubts around the Streisand-Eastwood story are endless. Some fans argue it's simply impossible that such a pairing wouldn't have been exposed in more detail, especially given the obsessive coverage both stars received in the late 80s. Others counter that both had enough influence and resources to keep a brief liaison buried if they wanted it buried. After all, by 1989, they weren't just celebrities. They were institutions, with enough power to control what reached the press. In the end, the evidence amounts to whispers, speculation, and one crucial fact: neither Streisand nor Eastwood ever put the story to bed. And in Hollywood, that kind of silence is dangerous. It creates a vacuum that fans and tabloids are only too eager to fill. The lack of proof becomes the very reason people believe, because if nothing happened, wouldn't it have been easy to just say so? And yet, to truly understand why this rumor stuck for so long, you can't just look at the story in isolation. You have to look at Clint Eastwood's pattern, the long history of affairs, secret children, and complicated romances that blurred the line between fact and speculation. Because once you see the bigger picture of Eastwood's private life, the Streisand rumor suddenly doesn't look like an outlier at all. It looks like another chapter in a pattern that has followed him his entire life. To understand why the alleged Streisand connection refuses to die, you have to place it against Clint Eastwood's complicated history with women. Unlike many stars who kept their personal lives tightly hidden, Eastwood's relationships often spilled into the public eye, leaving behind a trail of partners, children, and headlines that blurred the line between fact and speculation. What makes him different from most is the sheer volume and variety of these connections, many of which overlapped, and many of which were discovered only years later. Eastwood married his first wife, Maggie Johnson, in 1953, but even as his career was just taking off, he developed a reputation for wandering. By the mid-1960s, during the height of his fame on Rawhide and his Italian westerns, whispers of infidelity followed him everywhere. Those whispers later proved to have substance. Eastwood fathered children outside of his marriage, and as the decades passed, more and more of those children came forward, some only discovering in adulthood who their famous father was. The secrecy surrounding those situations created an aura of mystery and reinforced the idea that if Clint had another hidden chapter with someone like Streisand, it wouldn't be entirely out of character. Perhaps the most famous of his relationships outside his marriage was with actress Sondra Locke, which began in the mid-1970s and stretched across more than a decade. Their relationship was stormy, passionate, and ultimately explosive, ending with lawsuits, accusations, and one of Hollywood's most bitter breakups. Locke later described their time together as emotionally draining and controlling, while Eastwood maintained his silence, sticking to his trademark refusal to explain himself. This wasn't just a fling, it was a long-term entanglement that played out in full public view, showing just how complicated and combustible Eastwood's private life could be. Beyond Locke, Eastwood was also connected to numerous other women: flight attendants, actresses, and even political figures. The stories often followed a similar pattern. Rumors surfaced, speculation grew, and Clint himself refused to comment, leaving others to wonder what was true and what was exaggerated. Some of these women had children who later became part of the extended Eastwood family. Proof that behind the tough exterior was a man who lived a far less controlled private life than his on-screen persona suggested. The sheer scope of these affairs paints a picture of a man who was both magnetic and restless, someone who viewed relationships almost like a current that carried him from one shore to another. By the time the Streisand rumor emerged in 1989, Eastwood's reputation for complicated romantic entanglements was already solidified. To many, hearing his name linked with hers didn't sound shocking. It sounded plausible, even expected. After all, if he had romances with women across Hollywood, why wouldn't Barbra Streisand, one of the most powerful and captivating women in the industry, be part of that story? But there's another layer here. While Eastwood's history makes the rumor believable, Streisand's history complicates it. She wasn't just another actress in his orbit. She was Barbra Streisand, someone with her own powerful image and her own list of high-profile romances. To fully grasp why the rumor carried such weight, you have to examine her romantic history too, because pairing her name with Clint Eastwood wasn't just another headline. It was a collision of two towering Hollywood myths. If Clint Eastwood's private life was marked by restless affairs and tangled romances, Barbra Streisand's was defined by a different kind of spectacle. Hers was a love life scrutinized not just because she was famous, but because she was Barbra Streisand, one of the most recognizable voices of the 20th century, and a woman who carried herself with an air of control, vulnerability, and artistry that fascinated millions. From the very beginning, her relationships were front-page news, and unlike Clint, she didn't let silence do the talking. For Barbra, her romances often played out with a kind of openness, sometimes celebrated, sometimes criticized, but always watched. Her first marriage to actor Elliott Gould in 1963 was seen as the union of two rising stars. Together they had one son, Jason, and for a time they were considered a power couple of the 1960s. But by 1971, the marriage had collapsed, and Streisand was back in the spotlight as a single woman. That's when her romantic entanglements began to intersect with her image as both an independent woman and a perfectionist artist. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, she was linked to hairdresser-turned-producer John Peters, a relationship that was both creative and romantic, but also famously stormy. Peters himself admitted years later that their time together was full of passion, but also constant conflict, a tug-of-war between two strong personalities. Beyond Peters, Streisand's dating history included men from vastly different backgrounds, reinforcing her unpredictability. She was rumored to have had flings with actors, producers, and even political figures. In the 1990s, her name would later be linked with Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, a story that captured the public imagination because it connected her not just to Hollywood, but to international politics. By the late 1990s, she was in a long-term relationship with actor James Brolin, whom she eventually married in 1998, proving that even after decades of romantic turbulence, she could find lasting stability. But during the late 1980s, when the Eastwood rumor first surfaced, Streisand was still viewed as a figure whose love life was fluid and intriguing. She was powerful, successful, and fiercely independent, but also someone who carried an aura of romance that the press never stopped chasing. Linking her name to Clint Eastwood in 1989 wasn't just about adding another notch to either of their histories. It was about the collision of two very different reputations. Clint was seen as the restless cowboy, a man who couldn't be tied down, while Streisand was seen as the perfectionist diva, selective and meticulous even in her romances. The idea that these two worlds could meet in private was enough to make the rumor feel electric. For fans, the thought of Barbra with Clint was almost cinematic. The songbird and the cowboy, the woman of refinement and the man of grit. It sounded too good, or too scandalous to ignore. And because both of them refused to say a word, the story took on a life of its own. Streisand's history of high-profile romances gave the rumor credibility. Eastwood's history of hidden affairs gave it plausibility. Together, those reputations built the perfect storm for a scandal that never needed confirmation to thrive. But why has the rumor endured for so long? Why hasn't it been forgotten like so many others from that era? To answer that, you have to look beyond their personal histories and focus on the psychology of Hollywood itself. Because sometimes, the reason a rumor lives isn't because of what happened. It's because of what might have happened. Most Hollywood rumors fade with time. A story runs in a gossip column, fans whisper for a few months, and then the industry moves on to the next scandal. But every once in a while, a rumor digs in, refuses to leave, and becomes part of a celebrity's mythology. That's exactly what happened with the alleged affair between Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand. More than 30 years later, people are still asking about it, still speculating, still piecing together fragments of hearsay. The question is, why? One reason is the sheer star power involved. When two of the most recognizable names in Hollywood are linked, especially two who come from opposite ends of the entertainment spectrum, the story is almost too irresistible to let go. Eastwood represented raw masculinity, the stoic cowboy, the outsider who turned into a master filmmaker. Streisand represented refined artistry, emotional depth, and a voice that transcended generations. Separately, they were titans. Together, even just in rumor, they became the kind of pairing fans and tabloids could dine out on for decades. Another reason is silence. Both Eastwood and Streisand chose not to engage, and that silence was deafening. In Hollywood, where denials and public statements are often immediate, the refusal to even acknowledge a rumor creates a vacuum. Fans fill that vacuum with imagination, journalists fill it with speculation, and before long, the absence of denial becomes a kind of evidence in itself. People assume that if it were completely false, surely one of them would have laughed it off by now, but neither ever did. That silence allowed the rumor to move from being a fleeting headline into becoming part of their enduring legends. Then there's the timing. The late 1980s was a unique era in celebrity culture. Tabloids were at their peak, and Hollywood scandals sold more magazines than any blockbuster film. At the same time, there wasn't the constant digital documentation we have today. No social media trail, no camera phones capturing every private moment. That made it possible for stories like this to thrive in the gray area, believable enough to spread, but impossible to fully prove or disprove. For a generation of fans, that gray area was intoxicating. It gave them permission to imagine the details themselves. The pairing also persists because it plays into archetypes: the cowboy and the diva, the tough man and the vulnerable songstress. It's the kind of opposites attract fantasy Hollywood has sold on screen for decades. Only this time, it was happening behind the screen, or at least fans believed it might have been. That narrative symmetry made the rumor feel almost cinematic, like something that could have been lifted from one of their own films. Finally, there's the power of legacy. Both Eastwood and Streisand are still alive in the cultural conversation today, their careers spanning generations. Every time Eastwood releases a new film or Streisand announces a new project, their names re-enter headlines, and with that renewed visibility, old stories resurface. The Streisand-Eastwood rumor is one of those stories, a relic of Hollywood's golden gossip era that refuses to die because it still feels like unfinished business. And that's what makes this particular scandal so enduring. It's not about whether it happened, it's about the fact that it could have happened, and neither of them has ever said otherwise. In a world where celebrities constantly overshare, their silence feels almost like a wink, an unspoken acknowledgement that some things are better left to mystery. And as long as the mystery remains, so will the rumor. But what would it really mean if the whispers were true? How would it change the way we see these two legends, not just as artists, but as people? That question takes us to the final layer of this story: the potential fallout, the legacy, and why this rumor still has the power to shock. If the rumor between Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand had ever been confirmed, the fallout would have been enormous. For Eastwood, it would have fit seamlessly into the narrative of his private life. A man whose reputation for romance, affairs, and entanglements has been documented for decades. Another name, even one as monumental as Streisand, wouldn't have derailed his career. If anything, it would have reinforced the image of him as the endlessly magnetic leading man, the kind of figure who could quietly attract even the most powerful women in Hollywood. His fans might have raised eyebrows, but the broader public would likely have seen it as just another chapter in the already sprawling Eastwood mythology. For Streisand, however, the story would have landed differently. Unlike Clint, her image was more carefully managed, more meticulously protected. She had built a brand not just as an actress and singer, but as a perfectionist, a trailblazer who demanded respect in industries that were often hostile to women. To have her name linked to Eastwood, a man with a reputation for tangled romances and unresolved relationships, risked undermining the polished narrative she had worked so hard to control. For some fans, the rumor played into sexist tabloid stereotypes about women in Hollywood, that even the most powerful among them were defined by the men they were linked to. For Streisand, staying silent may have been the smartest move of all. By neither confirming nor denying, she let the rumor pass without ever giving it legitimacy. But the most fascinating part of this story is what it says about legacy. Both Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand are more than just celebrities. They're institutions. Their work has outlived scandals, rumors, and the shifting winds of pop culture. Eastwood has moved from iconic actor to Oscar-winning director, leaving behind a body of work that critics continue to study. Streisand's voice and performances have become timeless, etched into music history in a way few performers can ever claim. Their cultural contributions are so monumental that a rumor, even one as juicy as an alleged affair, can't topple their legacies. Instead, it adds another layer of intrigue, another shadow in the myth-making process that surrounds stars of their caliber. And maybe that's why this particular story refuses to die. It doesn't hurt them. It doesn't damage their achievements. If anything, it keeps them interesting, reminding audiences that even legends are surrounded by mystery. The rumor becomes part of their aura, part of what makes people still talk about them decades after their peak. It doesn't erase Eastwood's Oscar wins or Streisand's legendary albums. It simply sits alongside them, one more piece of gossip in the endless jigsaw puzzle of Hollywood history. In the end, the Streisand-Eastwood story is less about scandal and more about what it reveals about fame. Fame isn't just about what you do, it's about what people believe you might have done. And for Clint and Barbra, the possibility of a secret encounter in 1989 remains just that, a possibility. It may never be proven, but it doesn't have to be. The very existence of the rumor ensures that their names will continue to be spoken in the same sentence, linked by curiosity and speculation forever. But as enduring as this rumor is, it still leaves us with one final, haunting question. Do we remember our legends for what they accomplished, or for the mysteries they never resolved? In the end, the story of Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand's alleged affair is less about truth and more about mystery. No photographs ever surfaced, no interviews ever confirmed it, and no insider ever risked going on record with details. Yet the rumor has lived for more than 3 decades, passed along in whispers, fan discussions, and half-remembered tabloid clippings. Why? Because it had all the ingredients Hollywood thrives on. 2 icons at the height of their powers, a collision of personalities from opposite sides of the entertainment spectrum, and the intoxicating suggestion of a secret the world wasn't supposed to know. For Clint Eastwood, the rumor blends seamlessly into a life already marked by romantic turbulence. His reputation for affairs and complicated relationships meant that almost any story about him carried a ring of plausibility. For Barbra Streisand, however, the stakes were different. She wasn't just a performer, she was a perfectionist, an architect of her own image. Linking her name to Eastwood gave the press a story that cut against the careful narrative she cultivated. And yet, even with so much on the line, she never denied it. That silence, on both their parts, became the oxygen the rumor needed to survive. Today, both Eastwood and Streisand are remembered for far more than their private lives. Eastwood, now one of the most respected filmmakers of his generation, and Streisand, a performer whose voice and artistry have become timeless, have achieved legacies that dwarf any gossip. But the persistence of this particular rumor proves something about celebrity culture. Sometimes, people are less interested in what's real than in what might have been. The possibility of a secret affair between 2 legends says more about the audience's imagination than it does about the stars themselves. And maybe that's the lasting lesson here. Fame isn't just a spotlight. It's a mirror, reflecting back the fantasies, suspicions, and desires of the people watching. Whether Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand ever shared more than a polite conversation may never be known. But in Hollywood, mystery can be more powerful than fact. The mere suggestion that it happened has been enough to keep fans speculating for decades. So we're left with the question that has haunted this story from the beginning. Was it real, or was it just another rumor born in the shadows of stardom? We may never know the truth, but perhaps that's why the story endures. Because when it comes to legends like Clint Eastwood and Barbra Streisand, the unanswered questions are often the ones that keep their names alive the longest. And now it's up to you. Do you believe the whispers, or do you think Hollywood simply gave us one more story we were never meant to stop chasing? If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us bring you more deep dives into Hollywood's greatest mysteries. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Did Clint and Barbra really cross paths in 1989, or is this just another case of Hollywood mythology at work? We want to hear your theories. And if you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next investigation into the secrets, scandals, and untold stories behind your favorite stars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.